Hi, this is Kelly Shibari with Hot Movies for Her, and this is 6.9 Questions with
Dr. Mireille Miller-Young.
Hi, Dr. Mireille. And you go by Dr. Mireille, not Dr. Miller-Young.
I go through both. I go by both. It depends. I don't like my students to call me Dr. Mireille, but in this community, I like people to be able to say my first name, but just know that I'm a professor and that I'm being kind of cheeky.
And you are a person of scholarly studies in the art of pornography?
I am. I'm what you call a porn scholar. That's species. I'm a professor at UC Santa Barbara in the Department of Feminist Studies. I study pornography and its history as a form of popular culture and film, but also as a kind of industry where people work, a labor industry. And I'm interested in the politics of race, both in terms of how people are represented in film and how people experience work in that industry if they're people of color.
So your specialty is like people of color. So it's African American, Asian, Latina?
Yes, I did my first book, which is I'm finishing now, on African American women, because I felt like the histories that Latinas and Asian women have, for example, are so complex and different from each other that it would do the project injustice to put them all together. But I do refer to my interviews with women of color from other race and ethnicities throughout the book, and I'm hoping to do more on that work. But I also wanted to encourage scholars who are Asian and Latina to do that work too, and because I think that there's nothing really on it, and I'm the first academic to start this kind of field of study on black women in porn, or black people.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of work to do, but I hope to do more on more people of color. But I'm very interested in race as an issue, and I think that hasn't been talked about enough in porn scholarship.
How far do you go back as far as like history of people, porn of people of color?
I go back in my work since I guess the early photography. I look at, in fact, as soon as photography develops, and then film later, but in the mid-19th century. So of course porn, people say, like, has been around since the Greeks and Egyptians, and if you look at the Babylonian sculptures or something, you can see people having sex and stuff like that. But there's this kind of modern movement of porn that was, especially in literature and drawings, that happened during the Renaissance period. And I'm not really as much interested in that as I am visual culture, so I look at early photography and early film. 19th century is when it starts, and from what you could see then, they were taking pictures of black women slaves and Native American women and women in the colonies in Africa, South America, in Asia, Southeast Asia, and circulating these kind of pictures of them and their naked bodies as postcards and collectible items and private kind of photographs that people traded. And so you could see there is an early circulation and images of women of color at that period, which was, during colonialism and imperialism for much of the world, of European countries and North American countries, taking those images. And so I'm very interested in that period as like the foundation for what we see today.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's a really good question. A really good segue question, which is, what's the most, I've been asking a few other people what the most common misconception of women in sex work is, but yeah. I think in your case, I think the most appropriate question is, what's the most common misconception about sex work, sex workers, if they're people of color?
Wow, yes. I mean, I think, so it comes from two directions. One is from people of color communities. Which is an important one, because those are the communities that we as people of color live and are situated in, and we have families in, right? Which is that you're selling out, that you're kind of signing on to exploitation and racism, and making racism worse for everybody else, right? By participating in what they feel are stereotypical images or understandings, because largely people of color have been exoticized and hypersexualized and seen as having a deviant sexuality, and so because pornography is seen as deviant, and for a long time was considered obscenity and illegal, and in many places continues to be. You know, the feeling of people of color in a lot of communities is that you're kind of co-signing on that. You're participating in making the community look bad, and so you don't have good politics, and you're an embarrassment, and you're kind of creating shame for the community, a really powerful shame. And the other perception is maybe coming from white people who are predominantly have had this kind of knowledge passed on to them that people of color are hypersexual, and so they may think that they're just naturally that way instead of performing a character, you know, or performing in a film that has a script, that those kind of people of color sex workers really are just representations of how all black men have big black dicks, and you know, how women of color really are just more kinky and want sex more than everyone else.
Yeah, there's a lot of like interracial porn or cuckold porn where the male who actually gets to have sex is the big strapping black man, you know, and the poor white man has to sit in the corner of the room. It's kind of a very interesting dynamic.
I'm very interested. I'm working on an article right now on racial cuckold porn and, you know, the fascination with BBC, Big Black Hawk. It's basically, I'm arguing that there's this continuing, you could hear the conference going on, there's a continuing myth of the Mandingo. And the Mandingo is a kind of figure that was drawn from actually the Mandinka tribe in Africa, and it was an association placed on very strong, big black men during slavery. The idea was that they were worth some of the most money because they could be such good workers, and then often they were also used for sporting, for fights, and for breeding stronger slaves.
Yeah, I actually saw Django the other day, and there is the reference to Mandingo specifically for like blood sport.
There was an economy of trade for Mandingos, and so part of the perception was that those Mandingos were a threat to the white patriarch because they were just seen as such a kind of sexual force. They were very sexualized, and white patriarchs were afraid that their wives would be in danger, you know, that the black man was going to rise up for his freedom and take the wife. And this actually got expounded upon after slavery. During, as many people know, there was a huge spike and rise in lynchings in post-Reconstruction America, where in order to kind of make black people remain a political underclass and an economic underclass, they created this stereotype that all black men are rapists. And this is also something that became important for the fascination of white women because they associated black men with danger as well. And so then you see that as part of our sexual fantasies today.
Right. So there's a lot of social stigma, especially with black males. But what about, is there anything specific about like black female performers?
Yeah. So the stigma with them was that, okay, you know, for example, like in slavery, they only imported a certain amount of African people, about 5 million African people to be laborers in the United States. But you needed to kind of reproduce more slaves because it's very expensive to import them. And then after 1807, the import of slaves was made illegal. And so there was even more of an emphasis on breeding slaves. And so black women had this kind of three-part exploitation, I think. One is they were used for laborers, and in a way that they were treated the same as men. They were expected to dig ditches and plant fields and pick cotton and make rice and all these really hard-working crops. They weren't treated like other women at the time, which were white women, who were seen to be a delicate sex and should be protected from hard work. So they were in some ways just treated almost like men. And so there's a perception that remains that black women are more masculine. The second is that they were treated as breeders for more slaves. And that was also through using their sexuality by white men, overseers and plantation owners and patriarchs who used their sexuality to make more slaves or to breed them with other slaves. And that perception that they are fertile and overly fertile, problematically fertile now. Because it used to be an asset that they had a lot of children, and because those children were forms of capital. But now that black people are largely seen as a drain on the state, it's seen as a problem that they have children and they're portrayed as bad mothers.
I guess the last question would be, because of all that stigma, what makes black feminist porn? Is there black feminist porn?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think about the last thing I would say about the black women is that the fact that their sexuality was used not just for profit but also for pleasure for other people. They had this assumption that they were, and it continues, that they're really hypersexual and they want sex all the time. And so this is a really important conundrum for porn, where you want to show people who are wanting sexuality, but at the same time, if you're showing black women who want to have sex, you're participating in a stereotype that black women always want sex.
Right.
And so this is a very interesting problem, but I think what makes black feminist porn is really showing the kind of ownership and desire on the part of black women to be there in that space and to be making the sexuality for their own interests. You know, that they're there for their own interests and needs, and that they're showing something that is not so degrading, but something that's interesting and more complex, because we have been cast as these just very essentially stereotypes, like non-dimensional, like very simplistic ways. So I think a black feminist porn makes a sexual representation of black women that offers a kind of imagination beyond the stereotype, that shows them to be agents in their sexuality, and that treats them behind the scenes in ways that are respectful of the sex workers, that don't exploit them, because they are so exploited in the mainstream of the industry. They're paid less, half to 3/4 of what white actresses are, and there are often all these forms of microaggressions against black women that they have to deal with day to day. So I think a black feminist porn would push against all of those things. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, there's actually a lot of African-American porn, both men and women, and I'm sure that there's, like, over at the fetish movie site, there's probably like some cuckold stuff that has the whole BBC thing going, but there is definitely some feminist porn displayed over there. So anybody who's interested in seeing, feminist porn made by people of color can definitely go over there and check it out. So
yeah, we need more. I'm imploring people to come out and do that.
I'm actually seeing it a lot more in BDSM circles. My friend Melina is actually a very perfect example of that. She won International Miss Leather a couple of years ago.
Oh yes,
yes,
oh,
and
wow,
her presentation was amazing, because she actually had a performance where she started out in a rubber mamie outfit, and she was in chains as a slave, and through the course of the performance she actually unshackles herself and then chooses to get into bindings, because that's now her choice. And every time I see that performance, it's on YouTube, I've got to show it to you.
Oh my god, we have to watch it.
You have to totally watch it. It's like every time I watch it, I like, even just talking about it, I get chills up and down my spine.
Oh my god.
So I will definitely show it to you, and hopefully maybe we can get a video of it and put it up on Hot Movies or something like that.
That is great. I love it. See, I mean, I think that what she's doing is probably very controversial for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
But she's trying to find a way to represent the history that black women are coming into this with. It's just so often misunderstood. And when we start talking about slavery, people want to just close their ears and be like, why are they talking about that? It's over. Well, it's not over. It's actually a continuing legacy that shapes our lives, that shapes our opportunities in society and how we're treated and how we see ourselves, and it's a very profound issue. And so she uses that representation to display that she now has power, but that power that she has is connected to that history.
She actually engages in race play sessions, but she's very, very adamant about, like, when you're not in session, there's certain words, you do not use that with me, but you only use it during the fantasy session. So it's very interesting study of her work. But Dr. Mireille, thank you so much for joining us on Hot Movies Blog and Fetish Movies Blog, and we hope to see more of your work in the future. And your book that's coming out, when's it coming out?
Next year, A Taste for Brown Sugar, Black Women, Sex Work, and Pornography from Duke University Press, 2014.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.